We are now joined by Fiorella Isabel, journalist and analyst, to go deeper on Biden's State of the Union address. Welcome, Fiorella.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I'm hearing from the South. We just heard the State of the Union address. What are your first impressions for what President Biden said?
Well, Joe Biden made sure to basically reassure the American public that everything is fine, even though everything is not fine. The reality is that the United States is facing inflation, and although Joe Biden tried to say that they're in the best position out of any country in the world, the reality is that the war in Ukraine is affecting not just Europe with the high energy prices, but many Americans at home with high fuel prices. For example, Joe Biden stated that gas has gone down from its peak, which it has, but it's much higher than it was a year ago. So he'll say statements like, to pacify the worries of the American people, which are mostly economic worries about inflation, jobs, and healthcare and such. But he will refrain from mentioning the full picture, and that's just the essence of the Biden administration, the entire current government, where they will give a little bit and not tell the whole picture. Another thing to note is that they spent very little time talking about the economy and more so focused on talking about the good and what they plan on doing, investments and chips and helping families, but they didn't really specify exactly how they're going to do that. And simply just threw out some numbers and on investments and the future of America and how America's doing great compared to China and how they're happy that they're going to continue to unite and stand with Ukraine. But he refrained from mentioning the billions and billions of dollars that are to a war effort that has largely failed by many accounts now, and that isn't supported by the rest of the world, Latin America for one, African countries for one. And so what you're seeing here is just an avoidance of the reality.
Yes, like you were saying, Fiorella, Biden pretty much talked about all the good they have done, according to them, but also he said promise about what they could do in the future. Could this be a hint for him to, in the coming month or maybe years, for his announcement for the 2024 elections?
Yeah, I mean, you really, Joe Biden is positioning himself as the better, more sound candidate to whoever the Republican's going to be. So it looks like Trump's running again, perhaps Ron DeSantis. So what we're looking at is Joe Biden is positioning himself to the Latin public, the public in African American public. So he's trying to garner this sort of support and position himself as the positive candidate that's going to be looked upon favorably. But the reality is both parties have been in favor of continuing to fund this war in Ukraine to the tune of billions and billions of dollars. And the majority of people feel the country is divided, it's not united, and that the administration has not done a good job of providing for the people at home. And so he's got a really uphill battle to face, and he's trying to make inroads with, for example, activists from the Black community that are looking at the disaster that with Tyree Nichols and what the police have been doing. But again, this is just like before. Biden really criticized the police, but the moment he took office, he started continuing to fund the police force. He started ramping up the war machine. So this is a little bit more about talk rather than action, and it's the same thing with immigration as well.
Currently, Republicans control the Congress, and Biden still has 2 years to go in his administration. During the speech, he has made calls for Democrats and Republicans to work together to build a stronger country. How do you see this developing? How do you see this relationship between Democrats and Republicans moving forward for different policies that they would like to implement in the future?
Right. Kevin McCarthy is the new Speaker of the House, and he's a Republican. Nancy Pelosi, who has been the Speaker for decades, finally stepped down. And what you saw in the beginning was Joe Biden thanking Kevin McCarthy, saying that he's ready to unite and ready to work with Republicans as much as possible. The reality is these are two sides of the same coin. Joe Biden has long worked with Republicans. This is nothing new throughout his full career as a senator. So what we're seeing here is just going back to the status quo. Republicans and Democrats at the end of the day work together when it comes for war. And what we're seeing them really, really agree on is China. The idea that China sent a spy balloon has been repeated by mainstream media as if this was fact, when China has denied and said that this was not a spy balloon, it was a weather balloon. And they have continued saying this. And of course, the United States responded very aggressively, escalating tensions that were already high, and decided to take down this balloon with a fighter plane. And they're the only ones really saying that this is a spy balloon. If you look at the rest of non-Western media, they maintain that this is just a weather balloon. And so it seems ridiculous from the outside to look at the United States' reactions. So when they say Republicans and Democrats are going to work together, they're going to work together when it comes to foreign policy. When it comes to domestic policy, what's going to happen is there's going to be this back and forth, and nothing's going to get done. It's going to be very stagnant. It's you have a majority of Republicans in the Senate. You have almost an equitable amount of Democrats and Republicans in the House, but it's just, this creates a situation where little can get done because they use these sort of hot button issues like abortion, like gun rights, to stagnate the whole Congress. So none of these things get resolved on the domestic level. It's more so on the foreign policy level that they're agreeing on, and that's where all the money goes. And the American people right now are facing a housing crisis, poverty, inflation, still post-pandemic fallout in the job market, and that hasn't gone away. It hasn't been tackled. It hasn't been resolved. And the only thing that's been on the agenda and this sort of virtue signaling is, of course, the war in Ukraine. And now we're seeing more escalations with China, which is extremely dangerous. By the way, also no talk about the latest earthquake in Syria and the fact that the United States is still sanctioning Syria.
Thank you very much for your time here in teleSUR, for your inputs on the analysis of the State of the Union address.
Thank you.
Thank you for